Square Enix has one of the greatest library of critically acclaimed video game franchises out there. Although I'm sure many retro game fans would bemoan that the corporation is oddly hesitant of fully and properly utilising its retro library. Square Enix, the company that exists as of the early 2020s, does have a very, very deep library of acclaimed franchises to draw from. This primarily comes from the original 2003 merger of two Japanese studios, both famous for their role-playing and action-adventure titles. But the corporation also now holds most of the former Eidos Interactive Studios properties alongside games from arcade gaming titan Taito. This means that Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest and Kingdom Hearts all sit under the same roof as important franchises such as Thief, Tomb Raider, Deus Ex, Just Cause, Space Invaders, Bubble Bobble, Darius and many more besides. The modern Square Enix states that it's always keen to find new ways to exploit its heritage. But that key word is the problem, as there's a world of difference between exploiting and respecting past success. One of the prime examples of this difference came when the company decided that it was time to fully embrace the Android and iOS mobile gaming market properly, and it released Final Fantasy All the Bravest onto their respective app stores in early 2013. There was plenty of pre-release buzz about the title, the first original Final Fantasy game on the Western App Store. A historically important franchise with a horde of eager new and old fans keen to experience new twists on the best old ideas of the 8 and 16-bit console generation had to offer. This is not, I have to point out, the first Final Fantasy game on mobile phones. The company had been heavily involved in the mobile gaming space ever since 2002, and it had already ported the original Final Fantasy game to mobile, released the Final Fantasy VII snowboarding minigame as a single adventure, and made the original real-time action RPG mobile game Final Fantasy VII Before Crisis. All of this in 2004 alone. Most of these were Japan-only releases though, save the snowboarding that was exclusive to the United States, in respect of the fact that the Japanese phone hardware and infrastructure at the time was considered several years ahead of the Western market. These initial titles were followed by over a dozen ports and tie-in games that spread themselves across the old mobile phone network, then the growing iOS and Android stores. All the Bravest isn't even the first original Final Fantasy mobile phone game released worldwide, as that honour goes to Final Fantasy Dimensions. But that was a port of an originally Japanese-only game designed for previous much more limited phone systems. So Final Fantasy All the Bravest got hype from Western game journalists as this was the first mobile phone Final Fantasy game designed for worldwide release exclusively using the modern iOS and Android platforms. The title acronym, ATB, hinted that it was directly tied to the active time battle system that the old Final Fantasy games had pioneered, and it was claimed to be the greatest celebration of the old pixel art portion of the franchise's history yet depicted. Before I can explain how the game got it so wrong, I need to explain what the ATB battle system was and what made it so cool. ATB was designed to elevate the traditional turn-based element of role-playing, where players are presented with a menu and select moves or options based on their character's abilities. The player or enemy will go first, depending on their vital statistics, and each will take their turns consecutively until one of them or the other is either defeated or flees. ATB retains all of this, but rather than waiting for players to take their turn, the enemy has a timer, a countdown that varies depending on the length of the previous action. Similarly, the player has to subject themselves to these cooldown periods, and so whilst the fundamental decision-making process is the same, it's now conducted in something roughly approaching real time. ATB, Active Time Battle, is nothing more and nothing less than the invention of the cooldown timer. However, when Hiroyuki Ito programmed the first ATB engine into Final Fantasy IV in 1994, it revolutionised the industry, making all other RPG gaming series sit up and take notice. The system would be iterated on for decades until 2 or 3 hardware generations later, Square Enix and the Final Fantasy franchise seems to have lost interest in this antiquated form of controlling your characters. Specifically, from Final Fantasy XIII onwards, they've had increased focus on making battles more action-driven. So, in 2013, a celebratory callback to the ATB systems of lore would have been quite welcome and even appropriate for a mobile phone spin-off of the series. The concept presented in ATB is that rather than managing a party of 3, 4 or even 5 heroes, you instead recruit a whole army of them. Job classes, a concept from the very early 8-bit Final Fantasy games, return, and the idea is that as you progress through the game, you unlock more and more characters who have varied job classes such as dancers, beastmasters, samurai, berserker, summoner, geomancer, time mages, vikings, dragoons, and loads more. Each of the job classes has a different animation, a different delay on their cooldown timer, and so theoretically the game could be considered a timing strategy game. You have to select the character attack when they become available as their ATB gauge cools down. It's not a stupid idea for a concept, but the problem is that all 25 job classes do exactly the same thing: attack. They all leap forwards, play a small animation, and then return to refill their ATB gauge. All of the nuance of the turn-based battle system is gone. There is no strategy, just the need to be quick. Furthermore, all of the warriors are glass cannons. They can't take a single hit from the enemy. The pressure to be quick is therefore increased as your only protection from the devastating multi-character attacks that the bosses deal that can remove entire columns or rows from your party is to have them out of position making their move when the enemy attack lands. The game requires you to simply scroll your finger up, down and all around through your ranks of characters, launching them as a horde towards the enemy and then just waiting for them to cool down before launching them again. Each battle starts fast as you set legions of fighters forwards, but as more and more of your warriors are knocked out of the battle, things are going to slow down. There's no way you can come back from this, no way to turn the tide, no strategy. All you can do is continue to swipe and continue to fling your diminishing last few fighters forwards until inevitably the end comes. If you make it, if you manage to bring the beast down, a new army will assemble for your next battle and you begin again, fully refreshed. However, fail to complete the task and you have two options. Spend precious, unique hourglasses to reset the clock and summon a brand new army of characters to battle, or wait out the timer as a new army will assemble waiting your command. Slowly, new warriors will appear, one every minute, meaning if you want to continue, you need to put the game down and wait essentially half an hour before you can continue. Don't want to wait but ran out of hourglasses? That's fine. Spend real world money to avoid the delay. The problem is, when FF80B originally launched, it was before the mobile game market had sorted itself out and realised there's a gulf of difference between paid mobile games and free-to-play but heavily monetised apps. FF80B was heavily monetised, but you had to pay for it up front, and once the initial 10 hourglasses that you're provided with when you start the game run out, there's no way to regain them at all without spending money. And losing your party is not something that can be caused by lack of skill. The bosses in this game are tough, and they have plenty of HP, so even a fully leveled party with over 35 fighters is going to die regularly in the latter half of the game. You will fight, die, wait. Fight, die, wait. Fight, die, wait. Again and again and again if you want to proceed. There is no reward at all. Yes, occasionally you unlock new weapons that give your characters a very slight damage boost, and you regularly unlock new job classes and increase the size of your army up to 40. But when all of the characters do exactly the same thing, these are meaningless and just general stat upgrades. The only true unlockables in this game are the unique characters from Final Fantasy 4 to 13 and the premium content bosses from said game. But all of those are locked behind yet another paywall, which not only requires additional payment, but the characters are essentially random loot boxes from before random loot boxes were a real thing. Square Enix knew exactly what they were doing here. The unique, original, custom-made sprites of fan-favourite characters like Cloud, Tifa, Aerith, Red 13, Squall, Zidane, Tidus, Yuna, Lightning and Saz, and many more besides are exactly the reason people were drawn to this game. The chance to play against a pixel boss of Sephiroth was exactly the thing that fans of the franchise thought was cool. However, anyone who wants to play as Cloud, you've got a random percentage chance of unlocking him, so you'll have to pay again and again and again until the gacha mechanics get lucky. However, all of this content is both pointless, you get no benefit or difference for having these people in your party, they play just the same as every other expendable nobody in your party, and they're locked behind multiple levels of unfair monetization. It's purely cosmetic. If you've ever wondered why many console or PC based gamers have bad things to say about the mobile phone gaming arena, this game is a prime example of the problems. It put a bad taste in everyone's mouth. IGN, the world's largest video game journalism website, put out a video officially warning everyone not to play this game. And that had the effect of drawing a crowd of trolls towards it to check out just how bad the game was. However, in Japan, the team that made it didn't even really consider it a game. It was just an app, a fun little diversion, not one anyone was meant to take seriously. Japanese players had enjoyed years of mobile-based Final Fantasy content. It was purely by chance that this was the first heavily marketed Android iOS release in the West. It shouldn't have been like this. Reviewers looking for something positive to salvage praised the incidental text between battles. But there is nothing to this. It's poorly written slop, no story-based content, no context, just a succession of battles, one after another, that concludes with an ending screen that congratulates you. Congratulates you for what? Either you persevered through tormenting hell on the final boss, demonstrating incredible levels of patience no mortal soul should normally be expected, or you poured money down the drain for no reward whatsoever. There are two ways of considering Final Fantasy All the Bravest, and the difference largely comes down to what you consider value for money in the mobile phone gaming market. When the game was originally released, it was actually a paid download, and there was outrage that people had to pay for the opportunity to pay to revive fallen parties or advance beyond that initial roster of characters. At some point since 2013, Square Enix recognised the bad reputation this game was receiving, and they switched it to become a free download, meaning it can be played with no investment, save your time, and the minimally intrusive in-game advertising. It's still the slow, repetitive time sink it was before, but now that the cost is entirely optional, many more recent reviews have cast it in a better light, describing it as inoffensive rather than predatory. Either way, the lesson that Square Enix has taken is that the free-to-play is the way forwards in the mobile phone gaming world, and the money comes from heavy monetization of reward mechanics. Logging into a more recent Final Fantasy mobile phone game, it's impossible not to be inundated with menus flinging small incremental rewards to the player in a desperate bid to keep up their investment. And whilst for me that's dramatic overkill, it's impossible not to look back at ATB as the severely disappointing opposite extreme as an explanation of why things have to be this way. The business is clearly lucrative. Mobile gaming dominates Square Enix profits margin now, and it has done for many years. In truth, All the Bravest is going to be less than a minor footnote in Final Fantasy history, but it is a major missed opportunity for the people who were watching it closely. And what was supposed to be a celebration of the classic games and their revolutionary active time battle system was received as an insult to the very fans whose nostalgia it was hoping to build upon. However, if you want an explanation as to why from 2010 to 2020, Square Enix seemed to largely ignore the very oldest legacy Final Fantasy content, the critical consensus around this game does provide a clue as to their thinking about their own brand.